Hello everyone, so I am JAZELLE and LARANJO, and today let's talk about the government peace treaties with Muslim Filipinos. So, the historical roots of the conflict. The conflict in Mindanao dates back to the Spanish colonization in the 16th century. Islam was already there before the arrival of the Spaniards. So Spaniards labeled Muslims as Moros, creating religious division. So the Christians in Luzon and Visayas were politically favored. So ang conflict sa Mindanao nagsugod pa sa panahon sa mga Kastila. Sa una, naanay Islam sa Southern Philippines, labi na sa Mindanao. Pag-abot sa mga Kastila, ilang gibahin ang mga Pilipino, ilang gitunga, moto siya ang tawag nga religious division. Ang taga Luzon ug Visayas nga nag-convert sa Christianity ug ang mga Muslim sa Mindanao, muna siya ang gitunga. Ang katong mga nasa Luzon ug Visayas, gitunga siya. Then katong nasa Mindanao, gitunga na sila. Ilang gitawag ang mga Muslim og Moro o gipalaban nila ang duha ka grupo, mao ni naka-create og dako nga gap sa religion o sa culture. And then, let's talk about the American period and integration. In 1898, Spain ceded the Philippines to the United States. Muslims resisted integration into a unified Filipino nation, and the United States established the Moro province to govern Mindanao. Governance favored Christian elites, marginalizing Muslims. So, pagbalhin sa Pilipinas sa Amerika nitong 1898, gisamot ang pagbati sa mga Muslim nga lahi sila o dili sila apil sa sistema nga gikontrol sa mga Kristiyano. So, mura sila na trigger kay kanang mura gipa-feel sila nga dili sila belong, ingana siya. And then sa migration and land displacement, government encouraged Christian migration to Mindanao. Muslims lost control over ancestral lands, became minorities in their own region, and led to conflicts over land ownership and resources. So sa panahon sa mga Amerikano, kay ilaha man ang gikwano kanang murag ilang shushu ana ba, ilang gitry nga i-integrate ang Mindanao sa whole Philippines, pero dili gihapon siya equal. So naghimo sila og resettlement program nga nagpasulod og daghang Kristiyano gikan sa Luzon ug Visayas padulong sa Mindanao. So ang katong mga gikan sa Luzon ug Visayas gipasulod nila sa Mindanao. Tungod ani, ang mga Muslim nga naa nadaan dito kay napahawa og nabawasan ang yuta og influence. So kay na overpopulation naman sila didto no. So ang uban Muslim didto kay nahawa na sila sa ilang territory. Imagine nga ikaw ang original nga nagpuyo didto no, tapos papahawaon ka, tapos na mga bot nga daghan mo'y mahimong majority. So ikaw jud ang maka-feel og injustice kay dili man sila taga dito, din ikaw mo'y original nga naa taga diri, ikaw gipahawa kay tungod kay na populated na ang inyong area, then katulagi kay dili sakto ilang sistema, then kanang dili equal bitaw ang ilahang pag-treat. So nadyo siya injustice. So right now, let's talk about the post-independence tensions. So political power remained under the Christian majority. Resettlement programs continued after independence, and increased competition for land and resources resulted in long-term Muslim-Christian conflict. So mauto siya, nahimo siyang dako nga away, big deal kay siya kay syempre pati ang territory nila aside sa gibahin sila, then dili sila wala sila gi-include sa sistema, mura pa jud kuan nila ang territory sa mga Muslim mo to. Wala na ang resettlement program kay dili gihapon siya totally successful. So, paghuman sa independence sa Pilipinas, ang gobyerno i-control gihapon sa Christian majority. Padayon gihapon ang pagbalhin sa mga settlers sa Mindanao, mao nga naglalis ang mga tao sa yuta resources og sa power. Tungod ani nagka-conflict ang Muslims and Christians og indigenous groups, apil ang mga indigenous people. Kana nga tension hangtod karon na gihapon ug mao na siya ang root sa Muslim and Christian conflict. So, mara to ang ako ang part. Ang uban nga topic kay i-discuss na sa ko ang mga classmates. Thank you.
Hi, I am Jasmine from section 2F. So, I will discuss the Habida massacre. So, the Habida massacre is the considered one of the key or event that the sparkless of Moro or residents that Muslim of the rescue were reportedly and also betrayed by the Philippines military for a secret mission to claim. And also the Sabah and whatever when he rescued the questions or refused the mission, they were also the allegedly and killed this incident cues anger. The among of Muslim in the Mindanao and to became powerful the symbol of the justice and the betrayal. Also, the one of the topic of the formation of the MNLF. So it is the response to grow of the disinfection. The Moro of National Liberation Front was the formed in 1972. It was the lead by Nor or Mishwari, the group of AIM, to establish an independent of the Bangsamoro state for the Muslim in Mindanao. The MNLF organized armed or resistance against the government making the beginning of the large or the separate of movement. So the materials of the law in the conflict during the presidency of the Ferdinand Marcos martial law was declared in 1972. Was it is this is in this certified of the conflict between the government in the Moro groups from the 1973 to 1977. So fighting that became the whisper in the Mindanao of the thousands of the people were killed by the and around of 1 million were displaced from their homes. That region became of the heavily militaries, so increasing the tensions of the violations. And the international support was the moral of the struggle, the gain of the international or attention of the especially from the organizations of the Islamic of conference. What did it call that now the cooperation this group? So supported the moral cause the recognize their struggle and the pressure the Philippines. So government to address the issue is they also encourage the peaceful or negation, which later lead to agreement between the government and moral leaders. So that's all my topic.
So for the Tripoli Agreement and the divisions. So for the Tripoli Agreement of 1976, it was the first major peace agreement between the Philippine government and the MNLF. So the MNLF stands for Moro National Liberation Front. So it was mediated by the OIC, which stands for Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Then the agreement proposed the autonomy of 13 provinces in Mindanao, aiming Muslim Filipinos, to have greater control over their political and cultural affairs. This includes ceasefire, which was intended to stop violence and create a path towards long-term peace. So, the failure of implementation. So, despite this agreement, problems arose. The Philippine government insisted on a plebiscite or a public vote to determine which areas would be included. However, the MNLF rejected because they would believe it would weaken the original agreement, which specified 13. As a result, only limited areas were only approved for autonomy, which it did not meet the expectations of the MNLF. So for the internal divisions, after the failure of the Tripoli Agreement, the conflict of Mindanao resumed, leading to renewed violence between government and Moro groups. And at the same time, internal disagreements began to emerge within the Moro National Liberation Front, which split them. So, one of the major outcomes was the MILF, or the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, in 1977, led by Hashim Salamat. So MILF adopted a different approach and ideology, which further complicated the peace process in Mindanao. That's all.
The continued challenges in implementing peace agreements between the Philippine government and the Moro groups after the 1987 Jeddah Accord. The Moro National Liberation Front, or MNLF, opposed President Corazon Aquino's plan to establish the Autonomous Region for Muslim Mindanao, or ARMM, through the new constitution, insisting instead that autonomy should be based on the earlier Tripoli Agreement. At the same time, the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, or MILF, felt excluded from the process, which further complicated unity among Muslim groups and weakened the overall peace effort. These efforts culminated in the signing of the final peace agreement on September 2, 1996. The agreement established the Southern Philippine Council for Peace and Development as a transitional governing body and introduced the Special Zone of Peace and Development. It also outlined a two-phase implementation process, including governance reforms and a future referendum on autonomy. The agreement effectively ended nearly 2 decades of conflict between the government and the MNLF, marking a major milestone in the Mindanao peace process. So, after the 1987 Jeddah Accord, peace efforts faced difficulties because the Moro groups disagreed with the government's plan. The MNLF rejected the creation of ARMM under the new constitution and wanted to follow the earlier Tripoli Agreement, while the MILF felt excluded, causing divisions among Muslim groups. Peace talks improved when Fidel V. Ramos became president in 1992 with OIC, led by Indonesia, helping mediate more organized negotiation from 1993 to 1996. These efforts led to the 1996 final peace agreement, which created transitional governance bodies and plans for autonomy, officially ending the long conflict between the governance and the MNLF. Peace negotiations resumed more actively when Fidel V. Ramos became president in 1992. The Organization of the Islamic Conference, or OIC, now supported by an expanded committee of 6, included Indonesia and Bangladesh, continued to mediate the talks, with Indonesia taking a leading role. From 1993 to 1996, multiple rounds of negotiation were conducted, reflecting a stronger and more structured attempt to finally resolve the long-standing conflict.
Good day everyone, I am CHLUIE AZUGA, and today let's continue to the rise of the MILF, the all-out war, the peace talks, and the international support. With the conclusion of the 1996 FPA with the MNLF, the MILF became the standard bearer of Muslim independence in the country. Talks between the government and the MILF commenced immediately, this time without a third party to mediate. The government also believed that the FPA could serve as a model for its engagement with the MILF. However, the agreements signed during this period of unmediated negotiations were limited to ceasefire agreements and ceasefire hostilities. So, after the peace agreement with sa Moro National Liberation Front or the MNLF, the Moro Islamic Liberation Front or the MILF became the main group fighting for their independence. Then, clashes between the parties also continued and reached its apex when the new Philippine President Joseph Estrada, elected in 1998, declared an all-out war against the MILF in April 2000. So, ang fighting ni continued gihapon and mas ni-worsen pa siya when si former Joseph Estrada ordered a full-scale war. In 2001, Malaysia was involved in mediating the peace talks upon the invitation of the President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo and concurrence of the MILF. The positive attitude toward Malaysia by both parties was rooted in the fact that Malaysia, having a majority Islamic population, also hosted many non-Muslim citizens and depicted an example that Islam can coexist peacefully with other regions. Muhagher Iqbal, the chair of the peace panel of the MILF, also noted that the common Malay culture and temperament among the key players is facilitations, and Malaysia's role made it to the constant figure in the ups and downs of the peace process. So, peace talks, nag-start siya under sa pamuno ni President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, with Malaysia as the mediator. Nonetheless, the Malaysia had weak leverage in terms of resources, which was remedied through the International Monitoring Team or the IMT, a joint military and civil monitoring group deployed since 2005 and composed of the countries Malaysia, Libya, Brunei, Japan, Norway, and the EU. And the ICG or the International Contact Group, created in 2009, the ICG's primary role is to ensure the implementation of mutually agreed approaches, and is composed of the countries Japan, United Kingdom, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia, with 4 international non-governmental organizations. So, Malaysia also needed help maong ang international groups nga IMT or the International Monitoring Team and the International Contact Group or the ICG supported the peace process. So, sila ang ga-monitor o nag-help para masunod ang mga agreements o mapadayon ang peace talks.
So next, I am going to tackle about the ancestral domain issue. The core issues here are as follows: focus on land ownership and identity. The MILF claimed ancestral homeland. They are rooted in historical displacement and central to peace negotiations. So the conflict in Mindanao centers on land ownership and identity. The Moro Islamic Liberation Front or the MILF claims that an ancestral homeland rooted in historical displacement of the Bangsamoro people due to colonization and migration. Para sa ilaha, ang land kay nagrepresentar og dili lang about territory but also their culture, their identity, and also their right to self-determination. So, tungod na ang land, since dili lang man na siya territory, nahimo siyang usa ka key nga issue sa peace negotiation towards the government. Both sides had to address historical claims while considering populations in the area. making discussions complex but essential for lasting peace. So the MOAD 2008 proposed Bangsamoro juridical entity included territorial expansion, planned referendum for affected areas, and then the aim to formalize autonomy or paglihis sa main government. Sa proposed Bangsamoro juridical entity or what they call BJE, usa na siya ka planned autonomous political unit para sa Bangsamoro under sa Memorandum for Agreement sa Ancestral Domain. So na-propose po sila to enlarge their area para to cover additional Bangsamoro ancestral lands, to have more territory, and having more territory will have more culture and identity. So they also intend to legally formalize self-governance. That's why they call it autonomy. And in 2008, the government and the MILF attempted to resolve this by issuing a joint communique and drafting the Memorandum of Agreement on Ancestral Domain, or what we call the MOAD 2008. The agreement proposed a referendum for around 700 villages in Mindanao to determine whether they would join the envisioned Muslim homeland. So, however, there's still a lot of setbacks. Christians or the local officials, particularly Christians, opposed the MOAD and brought the issue to the Supreme Court, and then the court eventually declared the agreement unconstitutional, which stopped the peace talks and triggered renewed violence in Mindanao, which displaced 500,000 people, stalling the peace process once again. Next, the legal challenges faced. So this is opposed by local leaders, brought to the Supreme Court, declared as unconstitutional, and halted the agreement, which resulted to peace talks collapse, violence resumed, and over 500,000 displaced, and major setbacks in peace processes. So there are negotiations between the government and the more Islamic front. However, it broke down and delayed the progress toward long-term peace and autonomy of the region.
In 2010, Benigno C. Aquino III was elected president and began peace talks with the Moro Islamic Liberation Front in 2011 with Malaysia as mediator. This restarted efforts to resolve the long-standing Mindanao conflict. On October 15, 2012, both sides signed the framework agreement on the Bangsamoro. This marked a major breakthrough after 16 years of negotiation. The agreement aimed to establish a Bangsamoro government with self-governance for Muslim Filipinos. It would give them political and economic control over their region. This explains how peaceful efforts were revived under Aquino's leadership. The signing of the FAB was important because it created a foundation for peace by recognizing the right of Muslims in Mindanao to govern themselves, reducing conflict caused by long-standing inequality and marginalization. After the FAB, further negotiations focused on key areas like power sharing, wealth sharing, and normalization. This ensured fair governance and long-term peace. Then on March 27, 2014, the comprehensive agreement on the Bangsamoro was signed to finalize the peace deal. It outlined the creation of a new autonomous region to replace ARMM. However, the proposed Bangsamoro Basic Law failed to pass following the Mama Sapano incident in 2015. The death of 44 SAF officers weakened public and political support. So So this is how the peace agreement was completed through the CABD, detailing how governance, resources, and security would be managed. However, the Mama Sapano incident caused public outrage, which led to the failure of the Bangsamoro Basic Law, delaying the peace process despite earlier progress. President Aquino ended his term without passing the law. This delayed the establishment of the new autonomous region. This is under Rodrigo Duterte. The Bangsamoro Organic Law was passed in 2018. This replaced the earlier failed bill and revived the peace process. In January 2019, a plebiscite approved the law, leading to the creation of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao, which was officially inaugurated on March 29, 2019. The peace process was eventually completed under Duterte. The passing of the Bangsamoro Organic Law and its approval through a plebiscite finally created a BARM, fulfilling the goal of giving autonomy to Muslim Mindanao and formally ending a major part of the conflict.